one of the naturalists here at Hawthorne Glen. I'm here today to talk to you about gardening. Gardening is a wonderful hobby. It's great for getting out in the fresh air, it's great for exercise, and it's great for learning about the world, and especially great for growing fresh vegetables. So today I'm going to give you a few tips to tell you how to start a garden, especially for beginning gardeners. So this is Gardening 101. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk to you about is the most important thing that you can do to have a successful garden is diversity. So the best thing you can do is to plant many, many different kinds of plants. Every year, your garden is going to be different, and it'll be different because of the amount of rainfall, the way that different kinds of bugs are. Some of them are more successful different years. A lot of bugs come out and kill different kinds of plants. So the more diversity you have in your garden, the more likely it is that you will have a successful garden. So what that means basically is some of the things that you grow are probably not going to do very well, and other things you'll probably have way more of them than what you really want. And then you can give them away to your friends. So diversity. So the first thing I want to talk about here is something called crop rotation. And what crop rotation means is that every year, if you have a garden, you should plant different things in different places, because different plants take different things out of the soil or add different things to the soil. So what you want to do is have a different plant growing there than you had last year. So that's called crop rotation. Another thing that you want to do is have many different varieties of plants, which is very important for success because you want to have certain ones that really do well. And the other thing I would suggest if you really want to have fun gardening is to try varieties of things that are different from what you have had in the past. So I've got a book here that has different kinds of tomatoes. So this one has over 50 kinds of tomatoes in it. So when you go to the grocery store, lots of times you'll only see a few different kinds of plants, but there are actually many, many different kinds of lettuce, many kinds of tomatoes, many kinds of apples, and a lot of those things are things that you never see, except if you plant your own. So I really suggest that you try something that you've never tried before. Look through the seed catalogs or on the internet and find something that you'd like to try, that's something new. And not only different varieties of plants, but different kinds of plants. So try some vegetables you've never tried before. A couple years ago, I planted okra here in Wisconsin. It did great. Plus, it was a great conversation starter. I have a community garden, which means that I don't have my own land, but I'm renting a small plot with a group of other people. And people were always walking by and asking me what the okra was. And so this is fun. It's fun to have something new, it's fun to have something different, and I really suggest that every year you plant something new that you've never tried before. The last thing I want to say about diversity is to use heirloom seeds. So heirloom seeds are seeds that have been passed down through the generations from person to person, and they're not, they're organic seeds, first of all, and organic means that there's no pesticide that's been put into the seed. So some seeds are what we call systemic pesticides. So they go there in the seed, and then when you plant the seed, the pesticide is in the roots, it's in the leaves, it's in the stem, it's in the flowers, it's in the vegetables. Heirloom varieties of seeds have no pesticides in them, and they are open pollinated, which means that they're not hybrids. They're pollinated by animals and not by people. So a hybrid is when people have mixed two different kinds of plants together. So the first year you can keep the hybrid, but for the second year they start to separate out, and so you'll see the differences that were in the original plants. But the heirloom varieties are open pollinated and they're much more stable. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk to you about is something called companion planting. And I put the sign up here and underlined this because this is something that you can look up on the internet. This is the correct search term to find the information you're going to need to be able to use this particular form of gardening. So what companion planting is when You plant certain kinds of plants together because they help each other out. So there are lots of books about this, there is lots of information on the internet, and I can't tell you specifically what to do because it depends on what it is that you intend to plant. There's a book out there called Carrots Love Tomatoes. So certain plants, if you put them together, will improve the yield. Other plants, if you put them together, will make certain things not do as well. So look up companion planting and look it up for the specific kinds of plants that you intend to plant in your garden. The next thing I want to talk to you about is when should you plant. So you should start planting now. I'm making this in mid-April. You should start planting now if you want to plant what are called cold season crops. So cold season crops this is my second point here, are plants that can be planted outdoors in the middle of April in Wisconsin. Some examples of this would be peas. I actually just planted my peas yesterday. Today's April 21st. So you can plant peas outside, you can plant lettuce, you can plant spinach, you can plant radishes. So those are okay to plant now. Things that should be not planted outside yet, you can start your seeds indoors. So you can start seeds in the house, in a sunny window, keep your seeds moist, and then you can get the small plants. This way you can save a lot of money by planting the plants as seeds instead of going to a garden center and getting the little baby plants. So right now in mid-April, cold season crops outside, warmer season plants inside. Now there are some plants that you cannot plant inside or they don't do as well. Take something like carrots, for example. You don't want to transplant a carrot. So those need to go outside, especially root crops are not as good to do inside. But in a couple of weeks, most things you can plant outside in southern Wisconsin between May 15th and May 30th. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk to you about is things that everybody thinks that they know, but in fact they probably don't. And these things are sunlight and water. So sunlight and water are really important because everyone thinks that you should have lots of sun and lots of water. But the fact of the matter is plants come from different environments. Some of them like it dry and some of them like it wet. So you should try to figure out which plants you have and take care of them accordingly. So depending on the plant that you have, read up about it, look in the back of the seed package in particular to see if that particular plant likes to have lots of water or not. The other thing is sunlight. Lots of people make mistakes with sunlight, especially with indoor plants, but the fact of the matter is some plants photosynthesize in full sun and some plants photosynthesize in shade or partial sun or indirect sun. These are plants that have evolved as an understory plant, so there's a tree above them, and then plants live on the ground below the tree, like our forest here at Hawthorne Glen. So these plants you should plant in direct sunlight. You can also think about where are you planting? Is this going to be on a side of the house that gets the sun in the morning? Is this going to be a side of the house that gets the sun in the afternoon? Is there going to be a shadow on your garden part of the day? Are you planting in a place where the sun is coming down on the plant all the time? So this is something to take into consideration that's really very important. Okay, so now I'm going to do something that maybe we shouldn't do in a family program. I'm going to talk dirty. So my question for you is, what is dirt? Usually I teach this class in person, and this is a question that most people can't answer. They get a very baffled look on their face and they think, well, dirt is dirt. But dirt is actually two things. Dirt is a combination of things that were never alive, like rocks and minerals, and things that were once alive, like decaying plants and animals. So your dirt is very unique. It depends on what kinds of rocks and minerals are in your soil and how much decayed matter is there. So these decayed plants and animals are also called compost. So these are things that are turning back into the soil. So it's really very important that you have enough of the living matter in your soil. But the other thing about dirt is it can either be acid or alkaline. You can test your own dirt by adding baking soda to a little bit of your dirt in a jar, or adding vinegar and with a little bit of dirt in a jar. So knowing what kinds of plants you have and what kinds of dirt you have make it possible to create a good combination. So certain plants do well in certain kinds of soil. Do they like sandy soil? Do they like a lot of clay? Do they like the soil to be acid or alkaline? So you can test your dirt. The other thing that's important about dirt is sometimes it can have lead or other metals in it. So I definitely recommend that if you are planting a vegetable crop as opposed to flowers, that you don't plant it next to a house, especially an older house that may have had lead-based paint on it and they scraped it off, and the paint can still be in the soil. So if you have a plant that's acidic like a tomato, it can pull the lead up into the plant and it'll get into your tomato. The place where I'm doing my community gardening used to be an old railroad track, and so the people that set up the community gardens put some garden cloth down first, and then they put the dirt on top of that because they were afraid that lead and cadmium and other metals may have gotten into the soil. So it's very important to think about what is your dirt made out of, where is it? You can also send soil samples to the University of Wisconsin. If you're in Wisconsin, you're a taxpayer. They will test your dirt for a very small amount of money. And if you're really concerned about it, I suggest that you make sure that your dirt is actually safe for growing vegetables. Another thing about dirt is they may contain pesticides. So one thing you should think about is what kind of mulch you may be using. If you're using something that's been mowed from a different place, or even sometimes commercial compost can have pesticides in it because it's been mixed with grass clippings or something else that may have been sprayed or treated. So it's very important to think about having dirt that's clean and safe for growing vegetables in. Another thing I'd like to talk about that's really important in terms of your dirt is adding worms. So every year I go to the bait shop and save the life of some worms and put some into my garden. So worms are really good for two things. One thing that worms do is they break down decaying matter and create some of that lovely compost that you want. The other thing that worms do is they aerate the soil. So for plants to grow, there has to be a certain amount of air in the soil. So the worms are creating tunnels, and as they create tunnels, they put air in the soil. So you've probably noticed in certain places where people walk all the time, nothing is growing, and that's because the earth is becoming more and more compacted by all the people walking on it, and it's very difficult for plants to grow if there's not any air in the soil. This is why nature centers like Hawthorne Glen tell you to stay on the trail. So we really want our plants to be growing here healthily, in a healthy way underneath the trees, so please stay on the trails. Okay, another thing that is important as well as worms is to learn about bugs. So there are good bugs for gardens and bad bugs for gardens. I have here a wonderful chart that's covered in plastic, and on one side it says a guide to good bugs of the Midwest, and on the other side it says a guide to bad bugs of the Midwest. So what is a good bug? A good bug is a bug that eats the bugs that are eating your plants. The bad bugs are the bugs that are eating your plants. So what we need to do is try to encourage the good bugs to be there. If you don't know what a bug is, which a lot of people don't, a lot of people are very unfamiliar with different kinds of bugs, you can take a picture of the bug and you can send that to the University of Wisconsin that I just mentioned, and they will tell you what it is. But if you don't want to bother with that, I definitely recommend one of these charts, because some bugs are going to be eating your plants, and this is one of the things I was talking about in terms of diversity. If there's a certain kind of bug that's really doing well that year, and it's going to end up eating a lot of a certain kind of plant, it's good for you to know what that is, to recognize the bug, to be able to think about from year to year why that bug is in that particular place. And the bugs aren't just on the leaves and on the stems, but some different kinds of bugs in quotation marks, are actually in the dirt eating the roots of your plants. And so when you're digging, you can be looking for these different things that might be eating the roots of your plants. So you might have a big, beautiful plant that looks like it's doing well, and then all of a sudden it dies for no reason that you can see, and that's because something has eaten the roots. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk with you about is something, a term that you can also look up on Google. It's called integrated pest management. And what integrated pest management is an alternative to pesticides. It's a way to figure out how to make your garden work without putting any kind of poison into the garden. So I already mentioned that you should be encouraging the good bugs. So a good bug, even a wasp is a good bug, even though lots of people are afraid of wasps, because wasps are predators and they eat bugs that eat plants. So anyway, one thing that you can do to really help your soil and help your plants is plant flowers with your vegetables. So you shouldn't have a vegetable garden without having flowers in it. And the reason why you should do this is because a lot of the bugs that would be eating your vegetables will actually end up going to the flowers instead. Now the only way you can make this work is if the flowers that you plant are flowering at the same time as your vegetables are flowering. So you probably know that in order for a lot of your plants to produce fruit, they first have to produce flowers. So a tomato will have a little flower on it, and then it turns into a tomato. So that tomato flower should be happening at the same time that your ornamental flowers are blooming. And that way a lot of your bugs that would be on your vegetables will end up on your flowers. So leave your good bugs alone. And then the third thing I have to say is kiss a toad. So we really love toads because toads eat bugs, right? So one of the ways that you can encourage having toads in your garden is to have like a little toad house or a little place where it's wet and shady. So a simple way to do this is to just take a flower pot and lay it on its side so that the opening is sideways, and then put the little tray that comes with the flower pot underneath and add a little water to that, and then the toad can hop into the flower pot and have a nice shady place to hide out while it's thinking about which ones of the bugs to eat in your garden. Okay, so what else is a great bug to have in the garden? My favorite bug, bees. We love bees. And why do we love bees? Because bees pollinate. So when I talk to children here at our nature programs, I talk to them about what do bees do, and a lot of children think, well, bees make honey. Well, the fact of the matter is very few bees actually do make honey. In Wisconsin, we have 500 different kinds of bees. Most of them are solitary bees, not bees that live in hives. Most of them don't make honey, but they're very important for pollinating. So what is pollinating? Well, I always ask the children if they know that there's boy plants and girl plants, and no child seems to know that. But pollination is moving the boy part of the plant, which is the pollen, to the girl part of the plant. So bees need to do this, or something else can do it as well, different kinds of bugs, some birds, bats. So the movement of pollen can happen when an animal comes down to the flower to take something from the flower, like nectar, which is what the bees do, and then they fly on to the next flower. And as they do that, they're moving the pollen. Bees are fuzzy, and so they have pollen sticking to them because they have static electricity. When they flap their wings, it creates static electricity on the fuzz that's on their bodies, and that makes the pollen stick to them. And they also have pollen sacs on their legs. So we really want bees in the garden. So what can we do to help the bees? Well, one of the things we can do is to plant native plants. So vegetables quite often are not native plants, but if you're looking for flowers to plant in your garden, think about what plants belong here in Wisconsin, what were native to the prairies that existed in part of Wisconsin. So those are some really important factors to think about the wild bees in particular. Another thing is diverse varieties of plants, because we have many different kinds of bees. The bees are looking for different things. So bees have different mouth shapes, they have different tongue shapes, they can go into different kinds of flowers. Different kinds of bees are attracted to different colors of flowers. So you should think about many different kinds of flowers in your garden to encourage the bees to be there. The other thing that's really important to think about is if you do use pesticides, please avoid pesticides that are neonicotinoids. So you probably heard that since 2006 we've had colony collapse disorder, we've been losing a lot of bees, and part of that is because of this particular classification of pesticides that are banned in Europe, neonicotinoids. So you're not going to go to the garden center and have it say neonicotinoid, but it's going to have a name. There's many, many different names that these are under, so you can look on the internet and see which pesticides are neonicotinoids and avoid them in the garden. You can buy them at garden centers. There's some very common names out there that actually are neonicotinoids, so try to avoid these at all costs because we don't want our bees to be dying, and we want our bees to create the kind of diversity in plant life that we need everywhere, so please bear this in mind. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about is something else that can really go wrong in your garden, and that is wildlife will come along and eat everything that you planted. So the best advice that I can give you is to love wildlife because the animals are smarter than we are. Get some binoculars, watch the bunny rabbits eating your lettuce, watch the groundhogs eating your tomatoes. But there are different things that you can do to try to avoid having a lot of loss to the animals. Of course, you can think about fencing. Also think about what animals can go under fencing. Here at Hawthorne Glen one year we tried to create a Three Sisters garden, which is a Native American variety of garden where there's corn growing in the center, and then the pole beans are going around the corn, and then the squash is around the bottom with the large leaves that are covering the dirt in a mulch-like way and helping the water be retained. But anyway, we had a terrible time and never were successful because we have a lot of chipmunks here, and chipmunks are something that can go underneath fences, and so that every time we tried to plant corn, the chipmunks would go out and eat the corn. So think about what you can put over the top of your garden. There's a number of different things that you can buy, but also what you can do to put around the garden to try to repel some of the wildlife. I've heard that marigolds, because they smell so bad, will keep rabbits away. I've heard that Irish Spring soap, if you put it on a string, it will keep deer away. Another thing that keeps deer away is if you have like a aluminum pie pan and put it on a string, and it starts to shake in the wind and it makes kind of a tinny sound, and also the reflection. So there are a number of different tricks that you can use to try to keep wildlife away from your garden, although as I said, you will be losing something to the animals, so just be happy that you've seen these wonderful animals coming to your garden. So that's all we have for today, and I hope that you can come to Hawthorne Glen sometime in the future and take a walk around and see some of the wonderful wildlife that we have here. Thank you.